on a journey here at the deep end. And it turns out if you've tracked us from being to life to consciousness, we're at the level of consciousness. Language and culture and all these experiences we have, they're all about consciousness. Something has become self-aware. The I, me, we don't really know what consciousness is, but we do know that consciousness has experience, and that is us. And what we've also learned is that consciousness is reaching for something bigger than itself. And what we've come as a human family to call it, and it's there in every single religion, bliss. The ultimate, highest state of consciousness. It's there in Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism. It's there in Muslim faith and Buddhist. Hey, it's what we have in common with atheists, Wiccans, animists, Taoists, Native Americans. We're all reaching. We're all reaching. And this experience of ultimate reality, a communion with it, and that's the language we've used, although it still falls short, is there at the root of every religion. It's an amazing event, this thing. One of my favorite stories is that Vishnu, in Hinduism, Vishnu is the main top god, and he's sleeping on an anaconda in a sea of bliss, and all of this is coming out of that, the great dream. I also like what Paramahansa did. He called bliss a transcendental state of superior calm, including within itself the consciousness of a great expansion and that of all in one and one in all. There's this place where we begin to understand. In Hinduism, they talk about it in some ways that are very helpful. And that's where the object and subject disappear, where all duality goes away. We become one. Our state of internal affairs is no longer dependent on the world of external affairs. Also in Hinduism, the word samsara, which is the process is getting off the wheel of reincarnation, relates to this concept of bliss, this inner joy that is untouched by gain or loss. And when we talk about joy and bliss, joy seems to be dependent and connected to something or someone. I know when my kids come into town and I meet them at the airport, the joy overwhelms me. Bliss is not dependent on anything in the world. It's not caused by, we don't know, is it grace? Some words that have been used to define bliss are unity, oneness, transcendence, completeness, wholeness, knowingness, ultimate connection, eternal, ever new, expansive, inclusive, infinite. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. It seems that bliss is where happiness, meaning, and truth converge and connect. It's like the great white light, the totality of all the colors come together. And all these ways I've been talking about it, language can't touch what bliss is. It's an amazing moment, an amazing movement, an amazing coming together that is the totality of something greater than all of who we are. It's almost like a cascading moment or a cascading movement where the I and me and the universe go in accord and we move as one. And in that moment, something happens, something fills, and yet it is nothingness itself that completes what is real and true. Can I explain it? No. But in the trip of consciousness, we learn over and over that every religion, even atheism, deals with this aspect of consciousness where we're connecting to some reality greater than ourselves. And of course, it's indescribable. Every religion, go to Rumi, go to the mystics in Christianity, go to the Jewish poets or Kabbalists. Over and over, we see this tendency of connection and a desire to talk about it. this concept of bliss is more than a concept. It is a true and real experience that cannot be described unless it has been experienced. And then you can only talk about it with people who've had the experience themselves. Talk about a strawberry with someone who never had a strawberry. You're making comparisons, but you never hit the mark. And that's what bliss is. It's really about this concept where we go beyond doctrine. It's where mysticism and consciousness come together. That word mystic is really where we go beyond doctrine. When we start asking questions beyond the dogma or what we've been taught, you're becoming a mystic. So here we are in this place of consciousness. The deep end has been trying to talk about consciousness, and of course we don't know what it is, but language is a great gift to help us deepen the mystery with each other. So, Bob, I'll open it to you first. When I talk about bliss, how is it that you land on this?
Well, it's a very interesting thing. When I was very young and first starting on my spiritual journey, my quest for understanding of who I am, why I'm here, why any of us are here, why is there a here, bliss came up. I started reading people like Paramahansa Yogananda, people like Teilhard, and you're right, the whether they call it bliss or no nirvana or it seems to be an aspirational goal in all of people's quests, whatever they may be, whatever unique path they're taking. And I can only speak about my own journey and start off by saying I've never gotten there. I've gotten little glimpses of it, maybe even lasting microseconds. Certainly never more than a few moments where I felt like I was close to it, but something immediately pulled me away, whether it was my ego or some external event or, name the infinite number of things that can cause you to fall from that state of awareness. But it seems to be so potent, so important, that it keeps drawing me and others back to that search for trying to grasp it, trying to move into that state and stay there. And I don't know if it's possible. I really don't. But I think, again, it's an aspirational thing that it keeps drawing me, it keeps motivating me to keep trying to get back.
Amen. How about you, Marianne? Bliss.
Well, so I was raised in the Christian traditions, and what comes to mind for me is the Garden of Eden and the story of that. And it's like that there is a state that we can be in where all is as it's meant to be, and there is no struggle, there is no duality, there's no good and bad. There's just this state of being. And I think that within all of us, there is this longing. There is this need to get back to something that we know is possible, and yet we can't see how it can be made possible. And I think that's part of this whole consciousness journey, is we're all just trying to figure it out. And the idea that there's this, we're trying to find happiness, so we want to touch happiness, and we can touch it, but we move in and out of it. We move in and out. And Bob, you mentioned that you felt that bliss like for seconds. You can kind of, it's elusive, and yet it's something that we intrinsically are searching for, even though we can't really say that it even exists for sure. And so that has always puzzled me, and that's been kind of my lifelong search: is what is it that within each of us that is looking for something outside of us? And I think the only way to be able to find that is to get in touch with what is inside of us.
Yeah.
And that's where we're going to find it. It's going to be back, that journey back inward. And that's, I think, we are collectively coming to that realization. Some of us, anyway.
Well, and I think it's important you bring out an important distinction, in that there's layers of bliss or happiness, if we're going to use that word. There's the mind level, there's the sensual level, where basically, the five senses, good food, beautiful things to see, etc., etc. There's the mind, which is the journey itself. There's some real happiness in that. There's the intellect, which is applying the mind in certain ways, and there's certain, you can almost graph happiness in these corridors. And then you get to consciousness, or the soul, and there's no upper limit. It seems to me that there's a different metric at play. And although we can't even be sure if it exists, we can be sure that the experience exists. That's why I call myself a phenomenologist at the deepest, because all I can say is this is what I've experienced. And this place called bliss is layered. And some of us forego, the senses, or the mind, or the intellect, in order to go for the bliss of the soul, which is where bliss really is. Happiness takes on a different order of understanding at that level to me, because it's no longer dependent on my intellect, on my neurology, or anything like that. And I think it's connected to grace in some way. And again, I said in my opening statement, it's where happiness, meaning, and truth come together. And all of that can't be said. It's an experience that has been verified and passed down through language and poetry and religion. I love Rumi. What does he say? Let us meet in that field out there, but beyond right and wrong, up and down. This is where the bliss place is. This is where Vishnu dreams, and we become part of Vishnu's dream. This place, bliss is not a place. Bliss is a moving with, in my mind. And I think that that's important. Also, you brought up, Bob, both of you did this. Bliss is both a return and the great reaching. Are we reaching back? No, we're reaching in. I always, in my native studies and Wiccan studies, I always marveled at the 7 directions of south, north, east, west, up, down, and the final direction is within. And this is the direction that is the orienting point in one's personal compass called I. I think, Marianne, you said it. It's a return, and Bob, you said it. It's a great reaching. You also both said it's inherent and it's aspirational, and that's where that great reaching comes. And Marianne, as you were talking, I go, well, this is great. We're waking up in a house of mirrors with no orientation. And I laugh because there's something in me that has some memory of the experience of bliss, and when I laugh, I seem to be able to be touched by it.
Well, go ahead, Bob. Yeah.
I was going to say that I wonder sometimes whether or not the action of being kicked out of bliss is as important as the action of reaching for it. And by that I mean that it becomes like a force generator. It becomes part of what motivates us to move forward in our lives. And if we were just there in bliss, there would be nowhere to move. And as human beings, as animals, which is what we are, we need to be outside of bliss in order to exist as human beings. And that's not to say that we don't keep striving to get back to it or to reach for it. But are we supposed to be in it all the time? And if we are we human?
Well, that brings me back to the whole discussion around the soul. So is the whole point of this for us to evolve from being a human being into some kind of a connected, blissful state where we are no longer part of this? Because the idea of bliss for me is independent of your circumstances. It's independent of the stage that you're on. It's independent of all of those things that you had talked about, Red Hawk. And so can we attain it? To me, it's like you're asking, can a human being actually attain that state? Or is it something that is inherently not conducive to being a human being, right? Because to be a human being means we have to struggle. And that's something that, Buddha taught. It's, life is suffering and there's all this struggle that we have to go through. And so once we get rid of that, does that mean we are no longer a human being, that we're an evolved soul that is time to move on?
Well,
Possibly.
And who gets to define what it is to be a human being?
Right? Yeah.
Everybody has their own view of that. I also think, Bob, we're not called to hang in it, to get there and hang in it. We're called to oscillate in and out of it, in that it might be reflected in our lives and into the world. And that reflection, and I agree with Immanuel Kant with this, human beings are basically good. Most people have empathy. And I know, in America and in the Western world, it's easy to insulate yourself so well that you actually dull your empathy. And that happens. However, there's this, on Facebook, everybody's trying to be happy. And I love Jung, it's not about happiness, it's about meaning. And I think Bliss says that it's happiness, meaning, and truth. It's the convergence. It's the place where we see that the world is within its own cycles. And some of those cycles are defined as dark and some of them as light. But at each cycle, it's not a circle, but it's a gyre, ever widening and ever going up and up. And that this cycle of, it's very clear in Taoism that, I had an accountant friend and he had a class ring that had the yin yang on it. And I said, dude, why do you have a yin yang on there? And he goes, well, in economy, if things are good, they're going to get bad. If things are bad, they're going to get good. It's this realizing the vicissitudes and our moving with them, and like a stick going down a river. Sometimes it's calm and sometimes it's very rapidy. We seem to be at the forces. However, we can also see that the stick and the river are one. We can also see that we are not separate from it. And I think this is the junction of bliss. There are places I can go to, I want to say that I can go to experience bliss, but it's more like there's places I can go to create an opening where bliss can touch me. And that the universe flows into me in that nature. Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Well, I was just going to say, as you're describing that and you're talking about that, I have to put in a plug for the float tanks, because that is a place where it's an opening for that bliss. And so I just, as you were saying that, I was like, oh, I need to go float.
and people have experienced this bliss. I thought Be Here Now, Ram Dass said it, there's all these ways you can experience it. Having a baby, tripping your ass off on LSD. There's meditating. To me, there's some places I can sit that create that opening, and I think that's what I wish for everybody, that they be informed by this ultimate reality that is undefinable, and yet can inform us and can give us an experience of how everything is related to everything and each other. And I mean, every atom, it's blissful to get in that place.
That experience becomes an energy generator. And I use energy in the broadest sense.
Yeah, good.
Not just electricity, but there's mental energy. There's energy of the will, energy of aspiration, to use that word again. And the very cycle that we experience flowing in and out of bliss may be an important energy generator for whatever the larger happening is that is one of those mystery questions. Again, I don't think we're really designed to stay in it, because I think that cycle is part of what is moving us along in our journeys.
Yeah, but I think being in touch with it in those moments, and then, like you said, well, you use energy generator, and then carrying that into all of the other things that you do in your life, because it brings a whole different way to view what you're doing.
It can completely change your life's trajectory.
Yeah.
Which in itself is an effect of an energy transfer. And you're suddenly inspired to do something you've never done before. And I mean, you see it in the lives, if you read the biographies of great thinkers and so forth. There's been events that have caused them to profoundly change the direction of their lives.
And here's where we get something where bliss redefines things. And I love, when you talk about energy generation, the word that kept coming to mind was synergy. It takes one and one, and it doesn't equal two anymore. It equals infinity. It takes two disparate things and makes them all part of the single happening. And that's where bliss really is, I think, that place where it's all one happening, and we get a taste of it. Just a taste. It's not even an appetizer. It's more like, a sample tray at Costco. It's that small.
But
it's just enough to know it exists.
What does that taste do to our consciousness? What does that taste do to our definition of ourself and our definition of the path that we're on?
Okay, so you bring up a question, and we don't have a lot of time, but I want to address it. So bliss is integral to the evolution of consciousness. If we look at religion and philosophy and all this, there's some experience that is a meta experience. So what is consciousness doing with this bliss?
Yeah, what's the end game, you mean?
Well, that's what I get back to energy. Consciousness takes that energy and transforms it into new behavioral directions. And where we go from there depends on whether or not we recharge ourselves with another taste, and what we do to then with that to move again along our path.
Well, and for me, I've said it in the End Game podcast on the Bible. It starts as a garden and it ends as a city. In other words, human beings analog the very diversity and systems that give rise to life itself, and that's how we maintain. And so how do we create almost an organic analog to ecology and creation and the diversity and everything? It seems to me bliss is feeding that. How about you, Marianne? What is consciousness doing with this bliss?
Oh, that's a very good question, and I have no idea. But I'll tell you what. But I am along for the ride, and I am constantly exploring that question, and I will keep going in deeper and deeper, and hopefully I can take that energy that I get from that place, that moment. And I think one of the things that we had talked about is going inside is so critical for every single one of us to be able to kind of take something calm into the world, take something united into the world. For me, bliss is non-duality. It is, we are all one, we're all connected, we're all breathing together. And so how do you take that into the world? You have to get in touch with yourself.
Yeah. And, I used to say in one of my journals when I was rereading it, life is bliss unless you miss the love that's deep inside. And I don't necessarily believe that all the way anymore. But I do believe that there is a junction in us that has the ability to let bliss in. Now, I want to say one thing before I turn you loose on your final comments. And that's the ignorance of bliss. There's a real long history of the ignorance of bliss, and that bliss does not last long because it has consequences built in it. It's dependent on denial and defense mechanisms. So it's not really bliss. What it is a bastioning up and feeling secure behind your bastion and thinking that that's, your comfort equals bliss and happiness. And that's a whole different gig. But I just wanted to, as a footnote, put that out there. Marianne, final comment?
So I kind of go back to the idea that you mentioned earlier, and it was Rumi's poem about beyond good and evil, there is a field and I'll meet you there. And I think that's where we can touch bliss. It's beyond that duality. It's beyond the places that we get caught up in conditional living. And so it's unconditional living, unconditional space.
Amen.
That's bliss for me.
And I hope we get to meet there more and more. Bob, final comments?
Well, again, I'll kind of repeat what I said earlier, that we touch bliss, and then whether we're thrown out of it or we leave or we are pulled out, but we constantly repeat that cycle. And that cycle, I think, is an important part of who and what we are. So it's up there drawing us forward all the time.
Amen. And, we've touched on some things here that really kind of reflect on the coming theme, and that's consciousness is doing something. Consciousness is doing something. Now, what is consciousness doing? Well, we've talked about the essential processes, which are differentiating, complexification, and semi-permeability. And this is what consciousness is doing. And yet, it has these little energy pockets, and we've talked about that. It's all energy. Bob touched on it today. And energy seems to be transferring from one thing to the other, using each other's hydrogen and oxygen, using each other in that bond. We can look at it chemically, or we can look at it psychologically. Jung basically said every archetype is basically an energy concept. It's the way we have delineated certain frequencies of energy within consciousness. The mother, the father, the child, the treasure, the journey, over and over. Energy is transferring and becoming something new over and over. We talked about synergy today. Energy is going 1 + 1 = infinity. How do we figure this out? Or do we? or do we just dance? Dance, dance. My friends, we hope you had a great podcast with us. We'd love to hear from you. redhawkthedeepend@gmail.com. In all things, may the one flow through you.